I have a couple of stories to share with you this morning, and as they say, the lesson then will be yours. The first one goes back to my childhood. I don't remember how old I was exactly, but I was a quite young boy. My parents decided that what we needed around were a couple of chickens. So they wanted to do this from the ground up, to borrow another metaphor, so they bought an incubator. They got the manual, they got the eggs, and the process started. The days go by, the weeks go by, and not only my parents, but my two older sisters and I, being young, are quite excited about this experiment, this adventure. Well, a time comes where they should be hatching, and so sure enough, we see one of the eggs begins to quiver, begins to move, and you see the cracks forming in the shell, and you see the little fellow was trying to work its way out. Well, time went on, and this little chick was in quite a struggle. And it would push, and it would move and wriggle, and it would stop, and you could tell it was trying to rest, and then it would gain up the strength, and it would make another go at breaking out of the shell. But then it would stop and pause again. And I don't remember exactly all of the fine details, but at one point, my mother became concerned, like, this chick is not going to make it out of here. So what she did was she carefully lifted part of the shell and make sure that the chick could finally make its way out. Well, when it finally emerged from the egg, it just flopped over limp, and it couldn't raise its neck, its head, it couldn't do anything. And of course, and some of you know exactly why that chick died. We didn't know at the time, but we came to know. My mother inadvertently killed it. Because the chick, in the very process of struggling and forcing its way out, builds up its strength so it can survive and be viable, and that its strength comes from the very struggle. That's story number one. The second story, we go back much further in time to one of the darkest pages of Israelite history. They had entered the land of Canaan. They had obtained the nation promise, the land promise that God had given the Israelites through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah, and now the time had come for that to be fulfilled. But generation after generation, here was a nation that really failed to appreciate that their blessings came with responsibilities, and they forgot the covenant that they had made with God. And so as they're in the land of Canaan, they look at the nations, the tribes around them, and they look at their gods, their cultures, their rituals, and they begin to make God share a place with the worship of Baal, with the worship of Ashtoreth, who was this female fertility goddess that was considered in their mythology the female consort of the male storm god Baal. And they started worshiping these while they had the pretense of being the people of Jehovah. God then would allow some of the other nations to come in and to conquer the people and exact tribute, to take of their crops and of their other resources. And this would go on until the people were absolutely distraught, and they would finally, when they hit the spiritual and economic rock bottom, they would cry out to God for help. And God, because He's God and not man, He's merciful and patient, He would allow then and raise up a deliverer, known as a judge, to come in and to deliver the people from the hands of their oppressors. Well, at the time of our story, this had been going on for some generations until at this point they had so turned their back on God that God allowed a nomadic group of peoples known as the Midianites to cross over the Jordan River west, and they occupied a lot of the land of Canaan, and it was time for the barley or for the wheat harvest to come late in the summer and the early fall. The Midianites would come in, and they would, like locusts, gobble up all the produce of the land until the Israelites themselves could not even live off of their own land. And they were impoverished, and they cried out to God for help, and God decided it was time to listen and show yet again His mercy and His patience with them. It so happened at this point that there was a man of the tribe of Manasseh by the name of Gideon. Around the time of the wheat harvest, he had gathered the wheat and he had actually put it in a wine press. In other words, it was not on an elevated open space where you'd usually thresh out the wheat, the grain, because that was easily visible to the Midianites. So he was cowering and hiding the threshing of the wheat in a wine press. Not ideal for the task, but this would hide it and allow them to at least keep some of their food. As Gideon was doing this, the angel of the Lord sat down by the tree and appeared to Gideon and said, "Jehovah is with you, you mighty strong man of valor." At this point in time, Gideon felt like anything but a mighty man of valor. And he said, "Well, if the Lord is with us, sir, then why has he given us into the hand of the Midianites? Where is the God that our fathers have told us about who took us out of the land of Egypt with all of these miracles? No, God has abandoned and left us." Then the Lord said to Gideon and appeared in his full might and said, "Go, I am selecting you to deliver my people out of the hand of the Midianites. Go in this might of yours." Gideon now says, "Lord, I am from the least of the tribes, of the clans in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. How can I go and be the one who delivers them?" God said, "Go, I will be with you, and I will assure you that you will go and deliver them out of their hand." Gideon's not ready yet. And so he says, "If it really is you who are the one who is speaking to me, then let me bring an offering to you. Please wait here. I will bring an offering, and then that will be a sign that you really are sending me. Go, I will stay here and wait for you." So Gideon goes and he prepares a goat, dresses it. He makes some unleavened bread, and he keeps the broth from cooking the meat, keeps it in a pot, and he brings this all back to the Lord there under the tree. And the Lord says, "Place the unleavened bread and the meat on the rock." Gideon does so. Pour out the broth as like a drink offering. And then the Lord sticks the staff that he was holding on the top of the rock, and out from the rock, a blaze of fire shoots up, and it absolutely incinerates the bread and the meat. And then the Lord vanishes from Gideon's sight. And Gideon realizes who he's been dealing with in truth. And so he cries out like, "I am a dead man." But the Lord spoke to him, somehow that Gideon would hear, and he said, "No, peace be to you. You will not die for looking upon my face." And so Gideon built an altar there, and he called it Jehovah Shalom. The Lord is peace. Well, later that day into evening, the Lord came to Gideon a second time. And he said, "Gideon, I want you to take the second bull of your father, the one that's several years old, and I want you to use it and haul down and demolish the altar to Baal that's in your father's house. And the Asherah pole, to that fertility goddess that's next to it. I want you to tear those down, demolish them, and then I want you to build an altar and offer a sacrifice to me on that spot." And so what Gideon does is he takes 10 men from his father's household, and he goes during the night, taking that second bull, and he hauls down the altar of Baal, he cuts down the Asherah pole, and he uses that wood to make an altar to the Lord, and he offers that bull upon the altar. However, Gideon did this in the dead of night. And the reason why is because he was afraid that if he did it during the daytime, the men of the city would come out and they would kill him for destroying their altar and their God. So Gideon has this done in the night, and when the people in the community in the city get up in the morning and they see the altars torn, the idols torn down, and they see the altar burning, the sacrifice, they were outraged and they said, "Who did this? We're going to get revenge for Baal." Gideon's father came out and he said, "Look, Baal is a god. If Baal doesn't like what happened here, Baal can deal with it himself." And so Gideon then received kind of this nickname, this moniker, Jerub-Baal, and that means Baal will plead, as if to say, here is a reminder of the falseness and the cheapness of these gods. Around this time, the Midianites were making their kind of customary excursion into the land of Canaan. And at this time, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Gideon, and he sounds the message horn, and he rallies some of the tribes around him. But before he's going to go off into battle, when the Lord says now is the time to deliver the people, lead them in battle, and overthrow the yoke of the Midianites, Gideon says, "Please be patient with me. I'd like another sign that you are going to be with me in this. Look, I will lay out a fleece on the threshing floor. And here's the sign that I'm asking from you. Lord, make it so that in the morning when I get up, the fleece is saturated with dew, but the ground all around it is dry. Gideon wakes up in the morning and he takes the fleece. The ground all around is dry, but he wrings out the fleece, a bowl full of water from it. Gideon says, Lord, please be patient with me one more time. Tomorrow, confirm this sign and make it so that when I wake up, the fleece is dry, but the ground all around it is damp with the dew. Gideon wakes up in the morning. It was just as he had asked. And his strength, his confidence, his faith now bolstered, he rallies a group of 32,000 Israelites to go fight the Midianites. They encamp on the slopes of a mountain, and they can look down in the valley in front of them. And the Bible says that the camp of the Midianites was just teeming and swarming all over this valley. And as Gideon and his men were looking out upon this, you could understand the kind of trepidation that they would feel at the prospect of fighting such a large host, outnumbered. God comes to Gideon and he says, Gideon, we've got a problem, to paraphrase. We've got a problem. You have too many men with you. And God explains the reason why is because when you achieve the victory, you have enough men to where the Israelites will say, look, we saved ourselves by our own hand. So God says, you got too many with you. Go and announce to the people that if anyone is afraid or at all anxious about the battle, you can go on home. So Gideon says this to his men, and 22,000 of the men go and they return back home. Only 10,000 are left in the army. God comes to Gideon. We have a problem. There are still too many men. And so God has Gideon essentially put his men to a test to sift through and to categorize the men. He says, Gideon, separate the men. Gideon does this, and he gives orders to the men to separate themselves, and this is the way he does it. They come down to a brook of water, and the men who get down on their hands and knees and put their lips down to the water to drink is one group, and the other group that uses their hand and uses it like the tongue of a dog to cup up the water and bring it to their mouth. That's another group. They're separated out. Only 300 are the ones that are cupping the water and bringing it to their mouth, as a dog would drink with its tongue. And there were only 300 of them. And God says, this is the group you're to keep with you. I don't know if there was anything in that test. I wonder if the other group had been 300, if that had been the one chosen instead. I don't know. Anyway, with this group of 300, it's evening now, and they are contemplating battle the next day. God comes to Gideon and he says, Gideon, I will be with you in the battle that's coming up. But if you'd like a little bit further assurance here at the very end, go down to the edge of the camp of the Midianites, and I think you'll hear something that will interest you. So Gideon takes his servant Purah. They sneak and they go to the outskirts of the camp of the Midianites. And there Gideon and his companion Purah overhear a couple of Midianite soldiers. A couple of bums, I imagine them. All right? And so they're there on the edge of the camp, and one of them says, I had a strange dream just now. Well, what was it? Well, I just dreamed that a huge barley loaf came tumbling down the hill, and it hit a tent and knocked it over flat. His buddy said, well, that's nothing but the sword of Gideon. God has obviously given us into his hand. And Gideon hears that and he thinks, that's just what I needed. And he takes courage then. He goes back to his camp. And he decides, we're not going to wait until tomorrow. And so he divides his men up into 3 companies, 100 each. He says, do as I do. We're going to encircle the camp of the Midianites, and we're going to hide our torches. And when I give the signal, and when I do this, you all do the same. I'll blow the trumpet, I'll uncover the torch, and I will bellow out the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And so the men then slowly make their way, unbeknownst to the Midianites. They encircle the camp. And in the middle of the dead of night, Gideon uncovers the torch and he blasts his horn and he yells out, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And you can imagine the Midianites, all of a sudden roused out of their sleep, are hearing 300 horns and see 300 torches all around them. And the idea is, if that's that many torches and horns, just imagine the army that's behind all of them. The army panics. And as would often happen in ancient warfare, especially if God's hand is behind it, in the middle of the night, you think the army's in the camp? You think the enemy's among you? You see someone running towards you? Are you going to ask questions? You're going to ask for the watchword? Boom, you want to survive. And the Midianites then fall on each other and they begin to slaughter each other. The army of the Lord, the Israelites, they sweep down and they rout the Midianites across the Jordan. They kill a couple of the captains and leaders of the Midianites. And it is a tremendous victory for God, for the Lord, and for His people. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Besides that story in Judges 6 and 7, I'd like to reread a passage for you. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. God deals with Gideon and chickens and you and me and churches the same way. These are eternal truths. You can either resent the struggle or you can embrace it and count it all joy. God's working on you. Let Him work on you. The strength, the growth comes through pain. It comes through struggle, and there is no other way. Or else it dies. Go and do likewise. Thank you for listening this morning. If you would, go ahead and take out your songbooks and prepare to sing the song that Lance has selected. If there's any way this morning that as a congregation of God's people, we can be of encouragement to you, we can be a source of strength for you in your struggles or your difficulties, the Lord wants to help. The Lord wants to see you grow and develop, and we can assist you in that. If there's any way that we can be of service to you or encourage you, please make that known while we stand, while we sing this song together.